5. 2 Kings chapter 5. In a couple weeks, Brother Cassidy is going to be preaching on the Shunammite woman. And so I'm going to try to not tread any of her territory tonight, okay? And anyway, we're going to talk about a man named Gehazi tonight. And this is interesting because, you know, what's interesting about some of these characters is the complete disagreement among commentators on some of them. It's just crazy. And then you have to decide, okay, well, if you're reading after guys that are quote unquote scholars, and all of them disagree on who he is and what he is and what he did, then you have to come down and say, okay, well, where do we come down on this? And so there wasn't a whole lot of necessarily dispute in his life, but there was some, and you'll see at the end where maybe the intrigue is. And so anyway, 2 Kings chapter 5 and verse number 20, we'll begin reading there. Now, in chapter 5, you know, it's the healing of Naaman. And that's a very interesting, actually, discussion and sermon in and of itself. Of course, in the ministry of Elisha. Look at chapter 5, verse number 20. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, Behold, my master hath spared Naaman this Syrian, in not receiving at his hands that which he brought. But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him and take somewhat of him. So Gehazi followed after Naaman. Now remember, it was Elisha that healed Naaman or told him what to do. And Gehazi is kind of like, whoa, you're letting this opportunity pass without taking something from him. Almost like this miracle is free or something, you know. So Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well. My master hath sent me, saying, Behold, even now there become to me men from Mount Ephraim, 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. This didn't really happen, did it? Did Elisha send Gehazi? No, that's not true. So this guy just decided he's a servant of the man of God. And one commentator thought that maybe Gehazi was essentially to Elisha what Elisha was to Elijah. But you didn't see Elisha doing this in the ministry of Elijah, did you? He was training to carry on ministry, but nonetheless. And he said, verse 22, All is well, my master hath sent me, saying, Behold, even now there will be come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. And Naaman said, Be content, take 2 talents. And he urged him and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of garments and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bare them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hand and bestowed them in the house, and he let the men go, and they departed. And he went in and stood before his master. And Elisha said unto him, Whence comest thou, Gehazi? And he said, Thy servant went no whither. Ugh. So he lied to Naaman, and now he's lying to Elisha. You might get away with lying to Naaman, but Elisha has a straight connection to heaven. This is going to turn out really bad, I think. What say you? Yeah, yeah. And he said unto him, Went not mine heart with thee when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money and to receive garments and olive yards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and men servants and maidservants? The leprosy therefore of Naaman shall cleave unto thee and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow. Now it doesn't turn out very well here for him. So I want to preach to you tonight. I know it's spring break and it's Wednesday night and you're like, come on, give me something. You know, it's like when you're kind of discouraged and yet in your Bible reading you're in Leviticus, and you're like, I need something, Lord. And anyway, or Brother Mark, you're in Chronicles, you know, but there's something there, I can tell you. And so there's something here certainly we can learn, lessons we can learn from the life of Gehazi. That's what the title is tonight. The life of Gehazi is certainly one of which we should take note. We really should take note of what happens here. As with so many, if not all, Bible characters, there are principles from which we are to learn and apply. And some we really should learn and apply and make sure we don't do or do in accordance with whatever it is that would bring blessing. But there are warnings of what to avoid and encouragement on what to embrace. And so in the life of Gehazi, I'm telling you, there's some things that we ought to avoid. But I think there's some things that he could have avoided if he hadn't forgot some things. And so I want to kind of go over that. And this is going to be a little bit different than normal. No alliteration tonight. I'm sorry. Each point is actually going to be kind of a phrase, not. It's completely not a. Well, I don't think any of the preacher boys that preach, they're all on vacation and everything. So just don't tell them about this, okay? And so, but sometimes it just is what it is. And you know, some people say, oh, why does every sermon have to be alliterated? And I can say, well, it's not. You got to come to all three services. Number one, write this down. What can we learn from Gehazi? We can learn that he became indifferent to God's greatness. Gehazi became indifferent to God's greatness. Let me explain what I'm trying to say here. In other words, he lost the wonder of it all, the great things that God has done, that he did in his life and in the life of Elisha, and we could say in the life of Elijah and in the nation of Israel and all throughout history. How about this? How about in our lives tonight? Has God done anything great for you? If you're here tonight and you're saved, that's enough right there. He didn't have to do anything else. And that's tremendous enough in and of itself that God would save us, a sinner like us. I think about the song. I think a group is maybe working on, I don't know, to rescue a sinner like me. What a tremendous thought that he would that he would die for us and save us. It's beyond human comprehension, really. But he's been really good to us, and to God be the glory. Great things he hath done, we sing oftentimes. And Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, saw what God was capable of. He saw how God was using Elisha. He was actually part of the work, and this is where I got to be careful, Brother Cassidy. But I'll tread lightly, okay? 2 Kings chapter 4, of course, this chapter begins with the widow who was able to pay her creditors because of the oil that she sold. It's actually a very interesting concept. I remember talking to Brother Strange. Where's Brother Elam? There, Brother Strange a few years ago preached chapel, and we were eating lunch afterwards, and he talked about having an offering at the church he pastored. And basically it was something to the effect of, what is in thine house, coming from that account. Everybody go back to their house, find something that's worth something, sell it, and then we'll have a big offering. And that's what it was. Not saying take your wedding rings off or anything like that. It's saying go find what is in your house. You might find, if you listen to Dave Ramsey at all, you know that you got to sell all that stuff anyway, you know, whatever. She had one pot of oil in her house. That's it. And so the man of God tells her, well, go and get as many vessels as you can and fill them up with this oil. And so close the door and do this. And it's interesting because if I understand right, if she had more vessels, she could have had more oil. In other words, there was no limit to the oil except for what she put on it with the vessels she had. That's a very interesting concept. But anyway, they got what they could. They closed the door, and she pours in from that pot of oil. She fills up all the other vessels, and then she goes to the man of God and said, I did what you said. And then he said, well, go sell it and pay all your creditors. And she does. And it's a fascinating account. And Gehazi was present. Whether he was present for that or not, I don't know. But certainly he was there for everything else. And my guess is he was there for that and understood what God had done. He saw this Shunammite woman have a child miraculously. It was a miraculous situation. And then he ends up, if the story, I don't want to get too much into it, but basically he grows up and then he dies. And then she, is upset by this and goes to the man and says, I told you, don't tease me with having this child, and now he's gone. And then ultimately, he's raised back to life again. And Gehazi saw that. He was part of that process as well. He saw the pot. This is all in chapter number 4 of 2 Kings. He saw the pot that, according to the Bible, had death in it. It's interesting because they have this pot of food, and of course it was not. Food wasn't plenty at the time, and they were a little bit, one of the guys, I guess, got a little bit upset with just it being bland, and so he goes out and finds a gourd and just starts putting it into the pot and ends up poisoning the whole thing. I mean, that's just like people going to eat, mushrooms that are, out in the wild. It's not a good idea, man. If you don't know what it is, don't eat it, And anyway, anyway, now there's death in the pot. Okay. Well, the man of God comes and says, hey, put some, flour in it or whatever, or meal in it. And now it went from death in the pot to no harm. You guys are looking like you've never read this before. It's in there, man. We can go through it tonight if you want. I mean, we can give the 35-minute version or the hour-and-a-half version. 30, okay, all right. It's whatever you want. I mean, but you at least got to acknowledge that you think and I'm not lying to you that it's in there, okay? There was death in the pot, and now there was no harm, okay? That's how it goes. Oh, good night. Gehazi saw 20 barley loaves and corn feed 100 men. He saw that. He witnessed that. He saw basically the parallel in the New Testament would be like a John 6 kind of moment where Jesus fed the multitudes with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And here 100 men eat 20 barley loaves. And so he saw this. And then you see in 2 Kings 5, the healing of Naaman from leprosy. He sees this. And so I'm just trying to say that David, who we'll mention more of in a moment, had moments of terrible sin and periods of being away from the Lord. And yet think on these things that he wrote at other times. I mean, think about Psalm chapter 8 and verse number 3. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? And so I'm saying to you that one of the problems that can happen in the life of any believer is that we start to become indifferent to God's greatness. And here's Gehazi that was with the man of God, seeing the works of God, knew all the miracles that was taking place, and he became indifferent to the greatness of God. David had the same thing as I just read in Psalm 8. I mean, you know what happens with David. And by the way, Bathsheba wasn't his only sin, my friends. I mean, he makes camp with the Philistines. He believes in his heart that there's nothing better for him. He numbers the people, and some 70,000 people die in a short amount of time. And I mean, he has some major issues, and it's the same guy that wrote Psalm 8. What about 1 Samuel 17? You remember this story? Then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear, talking to Goliath, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So David's point was, in this particular text, that the God that hung the moon in place, the God that calls all these stars by their name, you will know who he is, and his people will know who he is. That he's a great God. I'm not coming to you, Goliath, in my own power and my own strength. I'm going to show you the strength and power of my God. And all the world's going to know there's a God in Israel. And all of these people are going to know that you're God, okay? Hey, turn me down just a little bit, Matt. I feel like is it loud? Is it a little hot? No? Oh, good, okay. Maybe it's just up here, Matt. I'm sorry. I don't know. We're still trying to figure these monitors out. But the first thing is he became indifferent to God's greatness. Second, he lost the understanding of his role. He lost the understanding of his role. He was given a role and a purpose in life, and he just, frankly, lost the understanding of that. It can happen in the life of a believer. We can lose the understanding of why we're here. I've seen people that used to come to church 3 times a week, and now they work more than they come to church. I've seen people that have surrendered to preach, and they've yet to preach a sermon because they've moved on to other things. We can lose. I've seen people that used to teach Sunday school, and now they don't. They used to be here 3 times a week, and now they're not. Every now and then you might see them. And we can lose the understanding of our role. That's what happened to Gehazi. I mean, think about it. The role of Gehazi was a servant to Elisha in the work of God. That's what his role was. And by the way, I'm going to tell you right now, here's what's kind of scary about Gehazi. None of us are exempt from what he went through. None of us. I can't count. Listen, I can't count on two hands. I would need both hands, both feet, and other people up here to tell you the people I know personally that used to be in ministry and are not. So none of us are exempt from this, my friends. I'm just telling you right now. You and I better make sure that we're putting up guardrails and making sure that what happens to Gehazi does not happen to us. Because it is. I mean, I'm talking about. I remember Abraham. I remember preaching this in about Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. That he was between Hai and Bethel. And Bethel means house of God, and Hai means heap of ruins. And I'm just saying that Abraham was one decision away from both of those, and we stay one decision away, really, from both of those. And so when you think about that, you think, well, he lost the understanding of his role. What a great privilege this was and still is, to be part of the work of God, to be a vessel of God, used by God in the lives of people, and for the advancement of God's agenda and his work. That's what this life is really all about. And he blesses along the way, and I'm so thankful that, man, we have a good time. I mean, life is good and all that kind of stuff. But really, we're here for this purpose. The purpose we are on this planet is to honor and glorify our Heavenly Father. And herein is my Father glorified, that we bear much fruit. And so I'm just saying that we were created for his pleasure. So I don't know if I like that setup. Well, here's the deal. When you were born again, you were bought with a price. And therefore, we're to glorify God in our body and in our spirit, which are his. They're his. That's why Romans chapter 12, when we present our bodies a living sacrifice, it's our reasonable service. Reasonable. By the way, not just like what we should do, but it's logical. So the whole concept is it's a logical response to the goodness of God. If it's interesting, because if you read Romans chapter 11, at the end, the last 4 or 5 verses talk about the greatness of God, and then literally goes right into chapter 12, verse number 1. And remember, those chapter marcations aren't, that they were put there. And so if you go from chapter 11 into chapter 12 without a seam there, you say, oh, that's why we present our bodies. Look at the God that we're. Look who our Heavenly Father is in chapter 11 and those last 4 or 5 verses. Gehazi is called a servant on a number of occasions. 2 Kings 5:25. Notice this. I want you to see this with your own eyes. 2 Kings 5:25. Look at the first phrase there. But he went in and stood before his master. Gehazi had to stand before his master. We're going to stand before our master. We'll all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. We're all going to give an account when we stand before him. Matter of fact, I don't know how long we'll stand, actually. It will be short-lived, our standing before him, because I have a feeling we'll be prostrate on the ground, in both shame and humility and exaltation. And I don't know exactly how it's going to be, but I'm just going to tell you right now, all of us will probably say these words, I wish I'd have given him more. We're going to stand before the master. And look at the next part of the verse. Whence comest thou, Gehazi? In other words, where have you been? What have you been doing? In other words, the master had an expectation of an explanation of where he was and what he was doing. He's going to stand before the master. And when he stands before the master, he's asked the question, where were you? What were you doing? You know what the judgment seat of Christ really is about? Where were you? What were you doing? That's a sobering thought, isn't it? We're going to give an account. It's here, Lockyer, who I wish, it is what it is. I mean, he wrote books on like all the men of the Bible and all the women of the Bible, and it's not much, I can tell you. I mean, some have a little bit more information than others. But he says this about Gehazi. He said, a contrast exists between one man and another. Elisha living a vibrant spiritual life, the grand prayer life, and faith life. That's Elisha. A vibrant spiritual life, a grand prayer life, a faith life. How many of you think that's a pretty good deal right there? Okay, yeah. That's the one, I'm assuming that's the one we all want, a vibrant spiritual life. a grand prayer life, a faith life. It's a contrast between that and Gehazi, who was grubbing in the earth and seeking contentment in the dirt. That's the contrast between the two. He goes on to say about Gehazi, he was familiar with sacred things, yet a stranger to their power. He was familiar with sacred things and yet a stranger to their power. And so we know, first of all, that he became indifferent to God's greatness. And second, he lost the understanding of his role. Third, he did things he never thought he would do. This is really a low moment in the life of an individual. I mean, how sick is this really? That Elisha heals Naaman, and that's a blessing. I mean, leprosy was not really a curable disease other than miracle, right? That's why Jesus would say later, you can go and show the priest, and that's why he did it that way, because it wasn't really a curable disease. And so now he's cured. Naaman is cured, healed. And Naaman, for whatever motive, and it probably because he was a Syrian or whatever the case, it doesn't really matter, he decides, wait a minute, I can get something out of this situation. How sick is that we would use our calling and our opportunities that God presents to us as some, I don't know, way to get gain in some way, shape, or form. So he chases Naaman down and says that he is coming on behalf of Elisha, which is a lie, to collect. All the while, it's, of course, for himself. I can tell you this, it wasn't worth it. A little bit of silver and some changes of garments certainly wasn't worth it. Ask anyone in the Scripture who sold a clear conscience or the peace of God for a price. Ask anybody in the Bible if having a clear conscience and peace was worth what they traded it for. Let's start with Adam and Eve. Was that worth? Do you think that bite of fruit was worth getting expelled from the garden and breaking off the separation between them and God? You think it was? Of course it wasn't worth it. Not even close. What about Lot? He saw the well-watered plains of Jordan and he fixed his eyes there. Do you think it was worth it? Of course it wasn't. Look at the mess that his life was. Peter tells us that only just Lot was saved and his righteous soul was vexed. He's the one example in the Scripture we can look and say, you know, if there's any biblical argument character-wise for eternal security, Lot is it, because he lived no life that would be pleasing to the Lord, and yet he had a righteous soul. His righteous soul was vexed. Lost his daughters, lost his wife. I mean, it was just, what a disaster. Is it worth it? I think not. What about Achan? Taken to the accursed thing. I mean, can you imagine having some Babylonish garments and some stuff, wedges, and you stick it in the ground? I mean, how sad is that? And God says, I'm not going, Joshua, get off your face and stop praying. I'm not going up with you till you handle this problem. There's sin in the camp. And you imagine they go through the people and they get to Achan, and I mean, can you imagine, you know, digging up the stuff that you buried in front of everybody, and you and your whole family are killed that day, and the legacy is that you threw it all away for a Babylonish garment and some silver and gold or whatever the case. I mean, are you serious? Think it's worth it? It's not worth it. There are many in the Bible, and frankly those throughout history, including us, who find ourselves doing what we never thought we would do. Hold on a minute. Don't be like, oh, well, not me. It's one thing I've learned with church and school over the years. You know, everyone says, oh, not my kid. I'm like, oh, yeah, your kid. And mine too. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. I would never, we look, in our house, I'm just telling you right now, we try not to, you know, we're not like Jedis or anything like that. But we don't use absolutes at our house, you know. You never do this or you always do that. It's just not true. You never put your clothes in the hamper. Well, I did one time 2 years ago, so you're wrong. It's not never. So I'm always, my skin crawls a little bit when I hear absolutes like that, like I would never do that. I've heard a sermon before, a preacher get up and say, I would never do that. Satan knows he can't get me to do that. And I'm thinking, yikes, man, I tell you, honestly, I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, I wish I could say that. No, number one, I can't say it. Number two, I'd be afraid to say something like that. I just know me. I know humanity. It's rich. That's tough. Because all of us we can find ourselves doing something we never thought we would do. David, on a number of occasions, his sin with Bathsheba, the disdain. I know that he had disdain for it, for what he did. Think about this. You remember when Nathan comes and he tells him this account, or he tells him this parable about this lamb, and how this guy that had a bunch took this guy's one lamb, and David was so upset about that. He said, not in my kingdom, it's not going to happen. He's going to pay fourfold. That guy's going to pay. Thou art the man. You think David ever thought, you think the same guy that wrote all those Psalms thought that he would be looking over his balcony and ultimately sin like he sinned and cause the problems in his family? Do you think that he ever thought that was going to take place? You ever thought when he wrote Psalm 23 and Psalm 8 and all those beautiful Psalms, do you ever think that was going to be his story? What about Peter? I will die for you. In the same chapter, he denies him 3 times. Good enough. I'm thinking to myself, Lord, if I'm going to say something like that, at least let it be the next chapter. I will die for you. And Peter, you're not going to wash my feet. You wash my head and toe. This guy was always running his mouth. But he never saw himself denying the Lord ever. And he did it 3 times. You ever think Judas thought, I'm gonna sell Christ out for 30 pieces of silver, price of a slave? Do you know he didn't even spend it? You ever read the whole story? Tried to give it back. Went out and hung himself. He found himself doing something he never thought he would do. Let me give you this 4th point and we're done. He became something he never thought he would become. He became something he never thought he'd become. Think about this. Look at chapter 5, verse 27 again. The leprosy, therefore, of Naaman shall cleave unto thee and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow. Gehazi ended up becoming something he never thought he'd become, a leper. I wonder how many of God's people sat in church services, frankly, like this tonight, on a normal Wednesday night. I'm a Wednesday night churchgoer. I'm in zero danger of anything like that. Gehazi never thought he'd become this either. If we do the things we never thought we'd do against the Lord, then we end up becoming what we never thought we'd become. The Bible tells us to look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. We ought to keep doing that. How do you keep from making decisions of doing things that you never thought you'd do and becoming something you never thought you'd become? I'm just telling you right now, there are people that have stood and sung in that choir, sung on this platform, played instruments, preached sermons, taught Sunday school, that are what they preached and taught against. Psalm 1, you know the slide, that this backsliding is walking in the counsel of the ungodly, standing in the way of sinners, sitting in the seat of the scornful. You go from walking to standing to sitting. There's this progression, digression, this slide. Psalm 73, verse number 2, but as for me, my feet were almost gone, my steps had well nigh slipped. One commentator said it like this: he contrasts himself with his God, who is ever good. He owns his personal want of good and then also compares himself with the clean in heart and goes on to confess his defilement. Errors of heart and head soon affect conduct. There's an intimate connection between the heart and the feet. There's an intimate connection between the heart and the feet. That's why the prodigal was gone long before he was gone. And by the way, the elder prodigal was gone too. I'm just saying that there's an intimate connection between the heart and the feet. I think one of the saddest stories in all of history is that of Benedict Arnold. It is a sad, sad story. I mean, here's a guy that if you take out the whole treason situation, was actually a highly decorated war hero in America. That frankly, and I'll be honest with you, he had some legitimate gripes. It's what happens in a lot of people's lives. He was overlooked and didn't get the due that was rightfully deserving to him. I mean, literally, I'm not even talking about pride. I'm talking about literally, rightfully, he deserves some of the praise and the honor that those people in that time frame, that's what they lived for, was that military honor. And it wasn't just promotions and stuff. It was their name in history. And I think about it, and I mean, he took step after step away from where he was, and in the end, he became unrecognizable to where he started. Literally wearing a British uniform and leading in battle against America. An American general taking steps to get to a place where he's ultimately a British general fighting against America. It's unfathomable, really. But you know what's interesting? His last words are said to have been this. Are you ready? Let me die in this old uniform in which I fought my battles. May God forgive me for ever having put on another. If we do what we never thought we would ever do, we'll become what we never thought we'd become. Why don't you take your Bible quickly and turn to 2 Kings chapter 8. We'll close with this. 2 Kings chapter 8, verse number 1. Then spake Elisha unto the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise, and go thou and thine household, and sojourn wheresoever thou canst sojourn, for the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years. And the woman arose and did after the saying of the man of God. She just did it. By the way, it's not the first time. And she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And it came to pass at the 7 years end that is this the chapter you're going to be in? Okay. I got to be careful here. Hold on. This is not about her for right now, okay? This is about him. Okay, but I need you to see this. And the king, and so in verse 3, and it came to pass at the 7 years end that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines, and she went forth to cry unto the king for her house and for her land. And he's going to get more into this, I'm sure, but basically here she was a widow now, and had left and now has to come back and try to figure out how to get her property back. Okay? And the king talked with Gehazi, verse number 4. Anyone find that interesting? The king talked with who has leprosy forever? So does this seed. He's talking to the king. I don't know where they're talking. Are they in close proximity? Probably not. Brother Neil FaceTimed me around dinner time, and I said, hey, this is weird stuff here, you know. And so he did some research while we were talking FaceTime, and that's what friends do, you know what I mean? Hey man, Gehazi has leprosy, or at least he was. I mean, that's what it says. Now he's talking to the king. The king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. What? Not the thief? Not the guy that tried to rip off Naaman? Anyone else sees? Is that not fascinating anybody else? Okay, high and mighties in here that don't think forgiveness is awesome. The servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha hath done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored a dead body to life, that behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed unto her a certain officer, saying, restore all that was hers and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left it, even until now. Gehazi is talking to the king about Elisha and about the Shunammite woman and her son, and telling the whole story. And she walks in after 7 years of being out of the land. And here's a woman still following the word of the Lord, by the way. The man of God's still doing what he does. And here's Gehazi back at it. Is he healed? I don't know. Is he restored? I don't know. I know he's called the servant of the man of God here. 3 chapters after he was told he's going to have leprosy forever. I'll tell you this, he's busy doing something. I mean, I think there's some silver lining or some ray of hope somewhere. Hey, thank God for, Naomi shouldn't have left Bethlehem, Judah, but thank God Naomi returned. Thank God that David should have never sinned with Bathsheba, but thank God for Psalm 51. Wow, what a tremendous, I don't know, I did some research on this. I'm like, and commentators are a little bit, they're torn on this, you know. All I know is that I see, here's a guy that really, for all intents and purposes, should have just been kind of put on the shelf and that be that. Here he is talking to the king about Elisha, the servant of the man of God. Some lessons we can learn, no doubt about it. We can become indifferent to God's greatness. We can lose the understanding of our role. We can, whatever the third point was, do what we never thought we would do. We can become what we never thought we'd become. All that can happen, but hey, listen, you say, I don't know, what if I've already messed up? Well, I don't know how much Gehazi, I don't know if he was healed or restored or whatever the case, but I know this, he was talking to the king, and he was still called the servant of the man of God in 2 Kings chapter 8, 3 chapters after he was condemned. It's a pretty awesome God we serve. Still a lot of work to do.